Now, just a word about format, real fast. We agreed on 2 questions in advance. Our debaters will speak for 7 minutes each on the following question, on the first question, followed by each making a 3-minute rebuttal. So without further delay, I see that they are ready to go, and we are too. Question 1. Did Franklin Roosevelt and his policies deepen the Depression or help bring about recovery? Amity, 7 minutes.
I'm going to use some seconds to say I'm very grateful to be here, to the Hauenstein Center, to the Seidman School College of Business, and to Fred and Wendy Wooden to be in their church, this wonderful church, the Fountain Street Church. How do you know if a recession is going away, is abating, is gone, is getting better or worse? We know how we know today. Recovery is there when we are back where we were before the crash. We know by the stock market on television, or we know by unemployment. That's today, and those are our criteria. So did FDR make the Depression better or worse? I will argue that he made it worse. One of the things you do when you study the New Deal, that John and I both did, is you don't just look at the politics or the economics, you look at the culture. Before writing this book, I didn't know that the board game Monopoly came out of the Great Depression. The modern board, as we know it did, though, come from that period. It was invented around Philadelphia. There were some other contributors. Parker Brothers at first rejected it for having more than 50 design flaws. But it did become popular. Something about the game resonated, Monopoly, in those years, the 1930s. You know the game. It's about trying to make it with real estate through property, through business. You buy a house, maybe you buy another house. When you get a hotel on the property, suddenly your life makes sense. The value of it all goes upward a lot. It compounds. And the game depends on a few things. Those include getting a predictable number of pay income tax cards, a predictable number, not too many, of go to jail cards. And it depends on the temperament of the bank, the person who plays the bank. You need a bank. Well, the bank doesn't have to be perfect, does he or she, but the bank has to be not too bad. Someone who enforces the rules, doesn't cheat on the math when he hands out the money, is relatively predictable himself, the bank. If the bank is too unpredictable, too much of a screamer, too nasty, too jumpy, or too domineering, what happens? You walk away from the board. FDR did many things that made the period of the Depression better or feel better. Ones I think of are deposit insurance, which has a history in Michigan because Arthur Vandenberg supported it, pushed it through. FDR didn't especially want it. Hoover certainly didn't want it, and yet it became law and made American lives better. FDR signed that law. FDR created the Securities and Exchange Commission. Very important when we're thinking again in terms of games, the game of the stock market. Can we play it fairly? Are the rules clear? There was a clear understanding generated by the institution that he established. He created Social Security. That's the bedrock for us, so important, that part of the net that we know we need. He understood about free trade very well, at least eventually. He nursed along with Cordell Hull for quite a time the concept that getting back to trade, because Hoover had done so much damage by signing a tariff. He knew this was what Hoover had done wrong, and that he rewarded Cordell Hull, this senator from Tennessee, in the end for helping him as Secretary of State to get us toward free trade during the war. And actually, Cordell Hull got the Nobel Prize for that in 1945 after the work. FDR also understood about the suffering of people. I wrote in my book, I think, about Albion, Michigan, where people were so inspired by our president, or the man who was just becoming our president, because it was the winter of 32, 33, president-elect, that they were making scrip currency, as everyone was. It was a deflation, and they put his picture, the new president, on their money. In Monopoly speak, if you want to use that language, he was doing these things. In doing them, he was being a good bank, reliable, clear, making a game that you could play. But he was also a bad bank. And here are the ways, on balance, that mattered more, the ways he was a bad bank. He did things that made people walk away from the table, and that made the Depression worse. One is he tried to run the whole game, an aggressive bank. The best example of this was the centerpiece of the New Deal, the National Recovery Administration. It ran the entire economy. John and I have both written about this, right down to what price you could charge. You had to charge a high one on this crazy theory that a higher price would get the economy going. You had to pay a high wage, even if you couldn't afford it. It was pro-big business, monopoly, and it was no accident that the game came out in the year that this NRA was very, very strong, and it hurt business, especially little business. It shut small business out. Another thing FDR did was raise taxes. So Hoover had started it. He pushed taxes up to 60+%, 62, maybe 63. FDR raised them and raised them again. So all of a sudden you could never get that hotel. Your money didn't compound because you were giving it too fast to the government, in essence. He attacked wealthy people as well with an animus we don't see today. You hear FDR talking about princes of property. What does that say to you if you own a few hotels? Me? I'm a prince of property. I shouldn't be at the board. Pause. He attacked wealthy people as bad people, and that too set us back because those wealthy people then stopped working. Capital strike. Went to the country house and waited it out. He did something that we never talk about, but I've been studying lately, which is he let the price of labor get too high. What does that have to do with depression? You're saying, well, there's a lot of scholarship on this topic, and I tried, therefore, to lay it out in the book. The NRA, that monopoly law I spoke of, and then the Wagner Act, the big union law that you know, both pushed up labor prices. Maybe people were paid more than the economy could stand, more than a fragile economy could stand. There are two scholars, Harold Cole and Lee Ohanian. I say their names carefully because they have meant so much to me in my studies, who showed that labor prices in the 1930s were 20% above the trend for the century. That's extremely weird given the level of unemployment. Those phrases that we heard from our parents and grandparents, nice work if you can get it. It was okay if you had a job about the 1930s. They were true. By helping organize labor and overpaying it, we were creating a second forgotten man, the man who didn't happen to be in the union and get that benefit, the man whom the employer, who was relying on government to set the prices, could no longer afford to hire. This was the ultimate jobless recovery, the 1930s. The data bear all this out. You know our criteria. The Dow didn't come back in 1935 or 1936 or 1937 to its 29 level. In fact, it didn't come back until the 1950s. Unemployment, there's a little bit of debate about that. Maybe it was 12%, maybe it averaged 14%, maybe it averaged 16%. The difference between terrible and awful, nothing that we can accept. So what I want to conclude with is what struck me, and that that we never learned, but they knew. They knew that it was ridiculous, and that the New Deal was, on balance, probably counterproductive. Eleanor said to Franklin, "Franklin, they are afraid of you. You've stopped business." That was important knowledge from the period, and it's important for us now, too.
Thank you. John.